Hello and welcome to this BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcast. I'm your host, Leah Rosen, the online editor for BioProcess International. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. This webcast is being recorded and will be made available for replay in the multimedia section of our website. We've muted the audio lines, but we welcome you to type in your questions to our speaker in the chat window on your screen at any time. After the presentation, we will begin the question and answer portion, and I will ask our speaker your questions from the chat window. Your questions in the chat window will only be visible to myself and our speaker. So with that, thank you for joining us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Helga Berg from MilliporeSigma.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. And I would like you to take you onto a brief helicopter ride and to see how we, and that is the pharmaceutical manufacturers, vendors, and regulators, should look to explore new ways, new avenues, to be curious and continue to learn, and ultimately collaborate to enable future trends in biopharmaceutical manufacturing. We all are working together to help and serve patients across the globe. And for this, we must continuously strive to explore new avenues. New avenues could be new therapies. It could be new ways of manufacturing drugs. It could be new ways of regulatory support to get drugs to market. We should always stay curious and be willing to learn and share expertise together, and all of this in a collaborative manner to enable ultimately and drive future manufacturing. The pyramid you see at the right-hand side of the screen is an adaptation of what Roche Genentech calls their supplier hierarchy pyramid. And exploring, learning, and collaborating should touch all of those levels of that pyramid. So starting at the foundation of assuring supply, that is for vendors, assuring supply of materials to the manufacturers, as well as manufacturers ensuring supply of drugs to patients, all the way up to innovation, looking at real new and innovative ways of producing and finding new drugs. Now, this slide shows you an overview of some of the global dynamics and a distinction between the more mature and the more emerging markets. There are no strikingly, let's say, new facts shown on this map here, but what you can clearly see is that in the mature markets today, there is a clear strive towards optimizing processes, intensifying processes for economical and time reasons, all the way down to looking at fully continuous, fully disposable processes. There is also a drive to looking towards novel modalities, new molecular entities such as gene therapy, viral vectors, and others, as well as biosimilars, whereas in the emerging markets, you still see a prevalence of classical pharmaceutical processes around vaccines, plasma, small molecules, with biosimilars coming up. But for all of those areas and application areas, one key factor that I, in my personal opinion, believe vendors should bring to the table is an abundance of technical and application expertise linked with appropriate technical infrastructure made available to the industry, and a very broad portfolio to support biopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical manufacturing. Now, I'll decipher the three numbers that I've put on the bottom of the map. For more than 2 decades now, our company has invested methodically into a portfolio that today spans far in excess of 90% of all the technologies and chemicals required for pharmaceutical processing. We are able today to provide access for the industry to more than 100 globally networked scientists and engineers whose mission it is to work side by side with the pharmaceutical manufacturers to develop, scale up, optimize, implement, and where necessary, troubleshoot processes and unit operations. This is, we provide a globally networked facility or globally networked facilities called MLab collaboration centers, 9 globally, and 7 out of those 9 centers are located in emerging markets. And in those centers, customers can come and join us in exploring new technologies, in being trained on new technologies, and help us in developing and co-developing new technologies and new approaches for pharmaceutical manufacturing. We'll now look into some of the overarching dynamics and needs in the emerging markets. Certainly, they're characterized by a very fast growth, as well as that today emerging countries have to look way beyond their own borders. So there is this local versus global dynamics that are at play. And last not least, the regulatory compliance locally, as well as targeting more global compliance. Now, I show the pyramid here again, and this is just to indicate again that it is very important that all of those dynamics and needs need to be met and critically viewed across, again, all of those levels of those pyramids, from assurance of supply to innovation. One element that I want to focus on the next slide on is on education, on training operators in those areas to make sure that plant startup and running the plant efficiently is a given, as well as training regulators to be compliant and to understand what the more global regulations are saying to ensure that their emerging countries are actually able to globally expand. I want to use the example of Singapore. Singapore, about 10 years ago, took an executive decision to implement large-scale biomanufacturing processing and production in their country. And for that, they early on engaged vendors as well as other academic partners to ensure reaching the objective that is written above here, attracting, developing, and sustaining a highly skilled and resilient workforce for the biologics manufacturing industry. This program has been endorsed by all of the key players that today have a presence in Singapore, and our company has been a key partner in developing and sustaining highly skilled workforce in Singapore. And to date, we have trained 70% of the Singapore pharmaceutical workforce, and 80% of which are employed today in manufacturing operations. I mentioned training of regulators. This is also very important in some of the emerging countries to ensure that the local regulators understand the more global dynamics and global best practices. And to give you an example, we have in the past few years trained dozens of inspectors of the Chinese FDA upon their request for them to stay current and understand the more global dynamics. Now we're stepping away from the market view and go more into the application and technology view. And there are some trends depicted here that we today are very actively involved in quite a few collaborative and co-development projects with the industry. And some of the main drivers, and this by no means is an exclusive list or an exhaustive list, but single use, the adaptation and introduction of single use into more and more process areas is absolutely prevalent. I mentioned it before, especially in the mature markets, the industry is looking at making the processes more efficient, more economical, and continuous processing is one major trend that we see. And last not least, I am not going to spend any time on this helicopter ride here today on digitalization, but ultimately the vision here is that unit operations will be connected with plant operating systems and supply chain And for this, it requires co-development of sensing technologies, advancing analytics to move more towards on-time analytics, and bioinformatics to manage all the data. Next generation manufacturing. This is linked to making processes more efficient, and this is driven by quality, time, and cost. And this ranges really from intensifying processes through to establishing fully continuous, fully disposable manufacturing processes. And in my view, vendor partnership should bring a broad portfolio of options to the industry and to the table, both in the form of technologies as well as technical and application expertise. And what we are currently doing and what we are seeing is that you can leverage existing technologies and operate them in new ways. Examples are shown below. It's, for example, cycling of capture chromatography, establishing more flow-through chromatography purification steps, or using single-pass TFF to concentrate feed streams and to make ultrafiltration or chromatography operations more efficient, all the way down to developing new technologies for intensified and linked processing. I want to quickly mention a collaboration that we have ongoing currently, funded by the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 banner on next generation biopharmaceutical process. Here we are closely working with an industry partner, Novartis and Lake Sandoz, as well as multiple academic partners in developing a next generation, very much single-use connected processing for downstream processing. Here, this is a cartoon that depicts kind of a vision of how continuous processing will look like. I would like to make a statement here that by far not all processes will be prone and adaptable to continuous processing, nor will all the industry move towards continuous processing. There will always be a huge spectrum of processes and ways of processing and manufacturing molecules, and our company is really set up to support customers whatever they require in terms of technical and application support. But coming back to continuous processing, the ultimate vision here is a fully connected, fully disposable, continuous process, which will require some breakthrough technology in sensor technology, in data management, holistic process controls, as well as managing the regulatory environment. With that, I want to land the helicopter, and if we stay, open to explore, to learn, and collaborate together, we will make sure that we will be best set up to serve patients worldwide to lead better and healthier lives. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will open the room for questions. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Helge. As a reminder, you can go ahead and type your questions into the chat window on your screen. The first question is, what are the emerging countries or areas in which you expect to see the most dynamic growth?
Okay, so that's a very good question. There are a lot of hotspots right now around the world, and some areas, certainly Asia Pacific. I mentioned it. We have quite a few of those MLab collaboration centers in Asia Pacific because there is just a lot of growth there, and I see some countries like Taiwan, like Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, really coming onto the map and investing significant efforts and money into their pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical manufacturing. Other areas would definitely include Latin America. Certain countries there are definitely on a steep growth path. I would mention here potentially Brazil, Mexico, and some other adjoining countries. Africa is also a very interesting place. There is a lot of activity around establishing manufacturing for vaccines, for example, and more looking at establishing potential delocalized manufacturing capabilities for the local populations. So these are kind of the hotspots that I currently see based on my experience.
Great. Can you give an example of process intensification?
Yeah, sure. So I did mention it very briefly, but there's one technology I depicted in one of the slides is single pass TFF, and it's not a superbly new approach, but it's definitely an approach that some of the vendors in the industry have taken. There's a lot of IP around it, but it is an approach that helps in an inline setting to concentrate feed streams, concentrate proteins and other entities to certain levels to just significantly enhance chromatography performance, for example, or enhance ultrafiltration performance. It can be used to kind of reduce tank volume requirements in existing plants. If you have specific constraints there, single pass TFF allows you to concentrate volumes quite significantly. So this is one key area that helps in intensifying processes. And there is quite a few others where, for example, to look at the more continuous processing, when you look at classical processing is more batch processing for the moment. And if you go into a more continuous mode, some of the areas like virus clearance, viral clearance using filtration is traditionally a batch operation and is validated in such a kind. And there are ways now, and we've developed these and presented these to the FDA, to actually allow for example, inline virus spiking, so to mimic actual continuous process conditions during validation. So these are a couple of areas that are being investigated, and use of activated carbon in certain applications. It's a very, very old technology, but it has some great capacity and great capabilities.
Great. And you mentioned the MLab centers. What are these labs?
Yeah, so because of limited time, I had to go over that very quickly, so thanks for the interest. But these laboratories, we have 9 of them across the globe, as I mentioned, and these are essentially non-GMP but GMP-like technical facilities that are open to our clients of the industry to come and actually test our equipment, our technology under real life circumstances. They can really touch the systems, work with them, get familiar with them, be trained on them, and work side by side with our technical experts to understand, are these technologies really what you might need? And if so, how can we start working on optimizing our processes on that existing technology? It's a very collaborative space where we just foster a very open and open collaborative communication between our technical experts and the technical experts of the industry. And we have, I can maybe mention very briefly the locations because I wasn't able to do that in the presentation, but we have one in North America, one in Europe, one in Latin America and Brazil, and then there is 2 in India, one in Singapore, one in Japan, one in South Korea, and one in China, in Shanghai. And I am very sure, given those trends, and because I'm responsible for those labs, I'm very optimistic that we will generate more of those going forward in the future. I hope that that answered the question.
It does. Thank you, Helge. And so thank you to our audience for joining us. Just a reminder, the recorded version of this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing on our website. And as a registered attendee, you'll receive a follow-up email providing you with a direct link. So We look forward to having you join us at future BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcasts covering many aspects of bioprocessing, and a few more from Millipore coming up soon. So look for those announcements in your inbox. Thanks, Helga. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.